Hello there. Today we're coming back down to earth with our topic, and we're going to have a look at a really important building here in Vienna, which is the cathedral. I've mentioned it a couple of times because obviously it has quite a prominent place in Vienna, right at the center. But we've never had an in-depth look at it, and it definitely warrants spending some time with it. This is a medieval church, and as with any structure that old, there's a couple of fascinating details. If we have a quick look at it here, we can see that it has two smaller towers in the front. These are called Heidentürme or heathen towers because they were probably built from the rubbles of Roman structures. But the main one, of course, is here, the tower in the south, which is the highest building in the inner city. No structures allowed to be taller than the Stephansdom, and in fact until today it is the largest church, or the highest church I guess I should say, in Austria. No other church is allowed to stand taller. But oddly enough, it only has one tower. The second one, the northern one, is back here, almost hidden by one of the Heidentürme. It has a little cap here that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the structure. I'm going to have a look at that later, why that is. Quite famous is also the roof with this mosaic, beautiful tiles in black and yellow. And we're going to see later that there's also some patterns on the side that are quite fascinating. We have a little map right here. This part here is the western part. This would be the entrance to the cathedral. So there would be the underground station right here, and then you can just nicely walk up to the Riesentor, which translates to Giant's Entry, Giant's Gate. We have the two towers, and then the nave. 1, 2, 3. The southern tower, the northern one, each with their own entrance, and then the Gothic choir in the back. The oldest structure that we have today is here at the front. I'm going to have a look at that in a minute. But there have been some scientific works that show that there was an even older church in the same place. The first one that we know of is from the 12th century, but it was probably built on top of a Roman gravesite that dates back to at least the 4th century. So it's all possible that there was a church there beforehand or some other religious building. What's interesting about the first church from the 12th century is that at the time it was built outside the city walls. You might remember that the city was built on top of the former Roman campsite and was a little to the side of where we have what we perceive as city centre today with the cathedral. So it was built outside the walls, and it was of a completely unexpected size. Compared to the actual city, it was huge. And so it tells us that the people who wanted it built were quite ambitious. So right here, we're looking at the Western Facade. We have the Riesentor, which might refer to the bone of a mammoth that was placed on top of the entrance for a while when it was found here in the area. But it might also just come from an old German word, Riesen, which means to sink or fall, and probably refers to some details here on the actual gate. So we don't 100% know why it's called the Giant's Entrance. We have a large window here with some Gothic elements. We have the two Roman towers, and you can see that there's a bit of a difference in the style, some more Romanesque elements here, especially with the actual entrance, and then some Gothic elements. 1, 2, 3. These parts here on the side, in fact, were added a bit later, so this would have been the original facade, which was then extended with basilicas here. And right here, we have a close-up of these three figures all the way up there that look down on the people here. And there would be Saint Stephen, Laurentius, and the Archangel Michael with a little dragon that's being slain. What we can also see on the facade here in the front is that the area around the cathedral wasn't just a gravesite during Roman times. This actually extended well beyond the Middle Ages, all the way into the 18th century. And today we can still find some catacombs underneath the cathedral. But 12,000 people were buried there. But of course today it's in the city centre, and there's only, I think, bishops are still buried in the crypt underneath the cathedral, but you know, everyday people are buried outside the city. Right, if we enter the cathedral, we can see here there are still some Romanesque elements. So very, very old details, all created in limestone. And today here we can see the organ. Back then this would have been where the emperor, the king or the emperor, would come for mass. And there are even some medieval frescoes that were found much later. They were found in the 19th century and then restored in 2004. But these are from the 13th century. They were covered up for a couple hundred years. You can see here the Holy Virgin with the baby Jesus on her lap. And they're placed on a throne. Here in the back we have the Gothic choir. So the entrance would be over here on the western side. You would walk through the nave and get here to the choir. And we have a nice view of the northern tower. And what's quite obvious when we look at the cathedral from this part is that the towers are not actually part of the main structure. So these are placed separately next to the cathedral. We can have a look at this again on the floor plan. You can see the nave here, which extends forward, and the towers are outside the actual structure. We have some additions here, which might make it look like this is part of the main church, but they really stand separately next to the church. The southern tower that we see here was completed in 1433, after about 70 years. So for the Middle Ages, it was quite fast. The northern tower was supposed to be built after that. The foundation was laid in 1540. However, after about 60 years, the project was abandoned. The reason is that when we come into the 16th century, we're in the middle of the Renaissance, and this Gothic style is not really in fashion anymore. On top of that, Vienna was undergoing some difficult times. The Ottoman Empire became a bit of an issue for the Habsburgs. The city was besieged, and they just needed the money that they had put into the church for some other things, like fortifying the city. So it was left like this for a while, and eventually it got this little hut on top in a Renaissance style. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the church, but I think by now it's just part of it. And the North Tower is actually still quite important. It's also actually quite tall at 68 meters. It's not like this is a small one. But I'm going to show you what we find inside the tower in a minute. But right here, you can see that the cathedral has seen some tumultuous times. This is a cannonball from the second siege of Vienna by the Ottoman Empire from 1683. Still stuck here inside the walls. Alright. Now let me see where we can find that. There we are. So inside the towers we have the bells of the cathedral, and one of them is particularly famous, and that's this one here. The Pummerin. It has its names because it has a really deep, loud sound. So basically it booms across the city. And it is said that this one was created from the metal of cannons that were left behind by the Ottoman Empire after the first siege. So cannons turned into church bells. We also have a Holy Virgin here on top. You can see some beautiful details all the way around. And on top. However, this is an absolutely massive bell. It's incredibly heavy. It weighs over 23 tons. And you can see here on the sides that it had to be stabilized by these wooden bars. They could be removed with these screws here on both sides, and then it could be wrong. Only to special occasions, of course, such as when the emperor came back to Vienna in 1712. So not just Catholic holidays, but also some imperial holidays. However, in 1945, the Pummerin was destroyed. There was a fire in Vienna at the end of the Second World War, and the cathedral caught fire too. And unfortunately, it couldn't be put out, and eventually the tower broke and the church and the bell was destroyed on the bottom of the cathedral. Parts of the old Pummerin, however, were used to cast the new bell. So this is the second one. You can see that there are some reinforcements all around to support the entire structure. In fact, with the old Pummerin, it was noticed that the north tower had taken some damage just because it was so heavy. So the north tower is protected today with the new one. You can see again it has some beautiful details. And here we can see a photo from 1952 when it was brought back to Vienna from Upper Austria where it was cast. We are at the start of summer here, but maybe you're already planning some holidays in the winter. If you're ever in Vienna for New Year's Eve, you can hear the Pummerin because it rings in the new year. At midnight, we would always listen to the radio when I was a kid. They would count down to the new year, and then you would hear the 12 strikes of the Pummerin, and then the Danube waltz, and we would waltz into the new year. I think that's a really nice tradition. So again, here we have the Immaculata, the Holy Virgin. That's on the bell. We also have some images here of the cathedral as it looked like in the 50s when it burned down. So you can imagine that must have been quite shocking. But today you can only find some small traces of it that were left behind intentionally, so as a reminder. But all in all, it looks brand new because, of course, for example, the roof really is brand new. You can see it here. It says 1950. So the date of the new roof with the coat of arms of the Second Republic of Austria and the city of Vienna. So the new bell came from Upper Austria and the roof came from the city of Vienna. All the different parts of Austria all donated some part of the new cathedral. It is now a steel structure, which was not that easy to install. You can imagine that a medieval building has some oddities. And so, for example, the nave and the choir are oriented to slightly different sunrises. The nave looks towards the sunrise on December the 26th, but the choir looks towards the sunrise on, I think, January 2nd. So it's not a big difference, but it's still a difference that becomes noticeable when you're trying to install a new roof. There had to be some renovations afterwards, just to make sure everything was fitting nicely, to make sure there was no rust that could damage the stone. And today it's really looking quite great. In fact, I think if we're looking back at the start here, this is probably one of the first times that the stone is white again rather than black. There were extensive renovations of the facade. And for me, the cathedral still looks like down here. So that's my inner image of the cathedral, just one that's really black. But today it's really, really beautiful. And here, in fact, you can see the other side of the roof. But this one here is from the Habsburgs, 1831. So that was preserved as well. One of the really important Habsburgs behind the cathedral was Rudolf IV, also known as the founder. And one of his portraits can be found outside at the Bishop's Gate with a little model of the cathedral. The Bishop's Gate is on the left-hand side of the church, right here. And here is the Singer's Gate, so that gives you an idea of who used these gates to enter the church. This side was also traditionally for the women. It is dedicated to Mary. And this side was for the men. It's dedicated to the apostles. And I think this is a really cute image. You can see his crown. And then that curly beard. And the slightly wavy hair and a very solemn expression. It's the same crown as in this portrait over here. Of course, in the Middle Ages, the cathedral also had some other functions that were not exclusively related to the church. It was part of people's everyday lives. And we can still see some evidence of this. Here, for example, this was the linen ell and the drapery ell. So people could measure that the linen they were buying was of the correct length, to make sure that everything was correct. There's some beautiful images from the stonework above the gates. Another close-up of the tiles on the roof. And these incredible Gothic details here on the sides. With all of these small towers all along the facade. And then some tiny windows here under the roof. And in fact, the south tower, you can see another window here that's open for someone to peek out. This was used for a long time to watch over the city. During the sieges of Vienna, they could look out onto the Ottoman camp, and up until 1955, it was used to make sure there was no fire in the city. You can climb up the stairs into the south tower, but not all the way. Right here we have the Viennese firefighters up in the tower. So some dashing uniforms, I have to say. Right, and finally there's one more thing that I'd like to show you. On the inside, there's tons and tons of statues along the columns. Like here, a Saint Sebastian. And then here we have some more Baroque statues, I guess. But there are two really famous ones. The one is called Fenstergucker. It's a figure that's peeking out of a window. And here we have Anton Pilgrim, who was responsible for building the cathedral for a couple of years. You can see him with his tools here in his hands. Again, great curls. But he's looking a little defeated, I might say. I imagine that wasn't easy in terms of jobs. And he's right here, just in the middle of the cathedral, still looking out over his work. It's a really, really beautiful church, and especially inside. There are so many details to discover. This one here, Saint Florian. Here, beautiful Schutzmantel Madonna. So a protective virgin, taking everyone under her mantle to protect them. And of course, plenty of church treasure. I also really like this one here, the Archangel Gabriel. Look at that hair. He's certainly seen some things. But I think these details are best discovered by taking a walk through the cathedral and having a look around. I think for tonight we've explored enough. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week. Good night.